just to hopefully not completely echo what Bob says, but you've heard this before, but the NHS beyond the table with Trump is not on the table, it's been slid under the table. HCA are already in the Priory, are in Optum, United Health, you've heard, they're already here. When you go to medical school, certainly years ago when I did, you get a lot of training in pharmacology, therapeutics, and in those days you're sort of brought up to think that there's a drug for every ill, and drugs are the answer. And it took me a long time to realise that there was a hell of a lot of pharmaceutical, big pharma influence on all this. And as a GP, they're knocking on your door all the time trying to flog you drugs and persuade you to use certain preparations. And they're morally corrupt, most of them, and that could be shown with the latest opioid scandal, where they convinced a lot of doctors that opiates weren't actually addictive. And now you're getting thousands of people dying on the streets in America because, of course, they're addicted and their health insurance company won't pay for them. The only positive thing I've heard recently about the pharmaceutical industry is something that I've been advocating years ago, and I was laughed completely out of town, that surely the NHS ought to have its own industry to produce its own generic drugs and bypass all these people. We know what drugs work, we know what drugs don't work. They can be produced quite cheap, say the NHS, they have a lot of money. But a lot of the MPs are in the pockets of pharmaceutical companies. They're not going to easily give that one up. And so actually, I heard Jeremy Corbyn say on Tuesday that was one of the policies, and I couldn't believe it. If he actually does that, it will not only make it more moral, we can have better guidance, and it will save a lot of money, but it will upset a lot of people. So you can guarantee they're going to go for him, hell for leather. Now the pharmaceutical industry will be after him as much as anybody else.
So in terms of hard outcomes, so the evidence is mounting, but it's not reported. So since 2010, a study done by the London School of Tropical Medicine and Oxford University estimated 120,000 people have died preventively due to cuts in health and social care. 120,000. If that wasn't bad enough, life expectancy in this country started to plateau and now is dropping. And earlier this year a report was published saying that people over the age of 65 are living 6 months shorter lives than they were before the austerity program. And finally, and maybe most shocking of all, is infant mortality. So this is children dying shortly after birth or within the first years of life. For the first time ever since records have begun, 3 consecutive years in a row, the levels of infant mortality have risen for the first time outside of wartime in this country. So these are statistically proven, undeniable facts about the impact of the cuts and closures that have already taken place. One thing I would like to mention about drugs and for whose benefit are we prescribing. Anybody in this room on a statin?
I refuse to take them.
Okay, so let me tell you a fact about the statins. So this is quite hard for me to say because I've been prescribing statins like Smarties for years up until relatively recently because the guidelines tell me to. And if you look at the interests of the guideline writers, then you start to see why they're so widely recommending statins. If you give a statin to somebody who's just had a heart attack, so the highest risk patient, and they take it religiously for 5 years, they never miss a tablet, how much extra life expectancy will they have?
I think it's about 4 days.
4 days. You will spend longer taking the tablet out of the packet, pouring a glass of water, than the 4 days extra life you gained. Well done. Meanwhile, more than half the patients get side effects. including muscle pain, memory loss, sleep disturbance, and it pushes some people into diabetes. What are we doing? We've managed to persuade doctors to poison the patient. That's what's happened. Because we are following the American corporate-dominated medical industrial complex. That's why. So I think what I want to get across before the meeting ends is how is the final scam going to be pulled off? How are we going to persuade people to go for insurance? First of all, you have blanket advertising. Anybody come across a Vitality life insurance and health insurance? They're everywhere. They have a huge advertising budget, so they must know something we don't. Premiership football teams they sponsor. Advertising. Negative propaganda. NHS is unsustainable, people are living too long, it's all these health tourists, it's all these people who cause themselves to be sick, blaming the sick. You're overweight, you drink too much, you shouldn't go skiing, you're living too long. Do you see what's going on? So that's the propaganda. And eventually you will have also contracting the universal comprehensive system. So it's no longer comprehensive. In some CCGs, if you have 2 cataracts, the NHS will pay for 1. In some CCGs, if you've got an arthritic knee and your BMI is over 30, you won't get your operation. There are hospital trusts that have a price list for you to pay and go around the waiting list. So there's this gradual erosion of what you're entitled to receive. So what do people do? Either you dip into your bank account, should you have the need, or you start to take out top-up insurance. Because this unsafe NHS isn't going to look after you. So you gradually have this middle-class drift out of the NHS, but with them they will take the NHS budget, now managed by Optum United Health, but they have to do something very important. They have to make sure that sick and expensive people do not go to the insurers. Now how will they do that? By giving them a very generous personal health budget. So you say to the sickest people, here's 10 grand, we'll look after you, you can spend it on a holiday, air conditioning, whatever you like, reflexology, crystals, whatever. So they stay put, meanwhile the middle class drift over. Yeah? So it's, one thing I do admire is how clever this is. It's certainly a significant scam to pull off. So that is what is afoot, and you will see more and more messaging in that direction. And now you're all expert in NHS policy and the conversion to the US system. The duty is upon you to challenge the lies, and you can challenge them in many ways. So if you are listening to LBC or talk radio about the NHS, you can go on there and inform the ignorant and very often contradict the presenters who are spreading the misinformation. So you can all do this now. You can all certainly tell your families about what you've learned tonight. If you don't believe it, we're going to provide you with plenty of other resources. 3 of them are at the front here. One is a book called The Plot Against the NHS. The middle one, Deadly Spin, written by an American insurance insider, explains exactly how the system works. And another book, How Corrupt is Britain, explains how public services have been set up with this bloated tier of management to facilitate the demise. So there's plenty of information for you to tap into.
Okay. To try and enlighten, so you're out of that's all. Do you want to go to the questions that were asked? Because I just want to change.
Okay. Just to follow up on this new category from the NHS, or is it government, I can't remember which, of limited clinical value. There's a lot of procedures now being called of limited clinical value, but actually they're the bread and butter that Bob was talking about: hernias, cataracts, hips, and knees. So any of you who've had your hip done, you really shouldn't have done it. It's a limited clinical value. You're much better hopping around. But this is where the ethics come in and how unethical the whole thing is, because it makes a mockery of the NHS constitution. Either patients have a clinical need, in which case they should receive